Gaming is for everyone, but not everyone is gaming. Wait, what? Whilst there are so many games out there in the world for you and I to enjoy, there are people who actively go out of their way to prevent games from being able to be enjoyed by the general populace. In essence, they are gatekeepers. I'm sure you've heard that term before, and in your mind probably have a good idea on what those people are like. You've maybe encountered them in online forums, or perhaps you have a friend who has actively tried to turn you off a game. But what if I told you the biggest gatekeepers of games out there are the publishers who release them? Let's start at the top of the iceberg and work our way down, and you'll see what I mean. We start at the tippity top. The base level, the common gatekeeper you see all around. Us. Yes, we as gamers are all gatekeepers in our own ways, no matter how much you wish to deny it. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You've played a game you really enjoyed, and later on, somebody asks you to recommend a great game for them to play. For some reason, you didn't tell them about that amazing game. Now, it may have just slipped your mind, absolutely understandable, but perhaps you know that person's tastes, and simply didn't want to waste your breath. Maybe you're ashamed to let anybody know that you could ever be associated in enjoying such a game. Or maybe you know that person would just suck at it, so you're just going to save them the embarrassment now. In fact, that last one is something a lot of gamers do. I've already done it in the last month. There's video proof of it where I describe how the Souls games are only built for a specific audience. Because they are. But at the end of the day, is it really for us to decide what a person should and shouldn't be allowed to play? You can certainly continue to have the opinions you have, but if a person wants to try a game, why stop them? They'll learn on their own if a game is good or not. All you can do is guide them. Gaming is about sharing your experiences with others, not preventing them. And now that we've got ourselves out of the way to blame, let's take a look at how publishers themselves are preventing us from enjoying their games. Next up, we have games which are actively designed to keep you playing for longer to prevent you from enjoying anything else. These are your multiplayer and live service titles. They keep you playing with a gameplay loop that's built to be addicting. Just one more game, you say, at 11 PM, and then the next time you look, it's 3 AM. But that's not all, because then they throw in incentives to keep you on that hook. For example, a new seasonal pass every few months, and just as you finish the current one, here's the new one. Oh, look at that amazing legendary skin. All you've got to do is play for 100 hours and it's yours. Of course, the thing with the majority of these games is that what they hook you in with is purely cosmetic, so one could argue if you're addicted to them, that's your fault. Some games, however, purposely hook you in by making you feel more and more powerful the longer you play it. Like gacha games, which are designed to have you spending money on incentives to make you feel stronger in the game you're playing. And, well, if you were to stop, think of all that time, energy and money you've spent. It would all go to waste. You can't quit now. Because of that hook, your mind may be so in tune to the rhythm of this one live service game that playing anything else just feels exhausting. You're essentially being gatekept from enjoying other games because, in your mind, this is now your comfort game. And therefore, you may remain on that hook until another live service or gacha game comes along to pull you in a different direction. There's nothing wrong with playing multiplayer and gacha games in moderation. I mean, me just telling you all this could be in itself considered gatekeeping, but after a while, you may begin to feel you're just being taken for a ride, especially when these live services begin to offer nothing of worth in return. And then it becomes the definition of insanity. And even then, let's say this live service game is the only thing you play and enjoy. Well, that's great. I'm happy for you. But eventually, we move down to the next level of the iceberg. Every once in a while, A video game company realizes a live service game isn't making them money anymore. So many publishers and developers seem to be relying on a live service future, rushing to get the next big Call of Duty, or Power World, or World of Warcraft out the door, all in the hopes of making money, and nothing else. Not for art, not to help the economy, not even just to create a level of fun. Just money. For some companies, they manage to entice an audience to play their live service games due to them sometimes being rather unique and well structured. However, for many other companies, they don't seem to realize that everybody else is trying to do the same thing. And if your live service is half-assed or something similar but better comes along, you get something like Lawbreakers. For context, Lawbreakers was a multiplayer exclusive first-person shooter, but at launch peaked at only 3,000 players, where it kept declining. And if you don't get the players, or you're not making the money, suddenly there goes a game you spent time and money on, whether you enjoyed it or not. For the record, Lawbreakers was then shut down little over a year after launch. And yet, it's not even just multiplayer exclusive games. Lately, we're seeing a trend of games that are, for the most part, single-player experiences with optional multiplayer components, but you're forced to be online in order to play it. Back when Microsoft announced the Xbox One, the idea of potentially having to always be online to play a game was heavily criticized. Now, it's something we barely bat an eye to, not realizing just how much faith we have put into the developers and publishers to keep these servers running. Because as soon as they don't, the game might never be able to be played again. The only thing you can hope for in those scenarios is that eventually offline modes get patched in, as it was for SimCity back in the day. Remember when they said it simply wasn't possible? And then it was. But because game companies only see dollar signs and the opportunity to sell you microtransactions, or God forbid potentially show you ads during play, yes, we're talking EA here, who else, always online games are quite literally going to be more common in the future. And by the time the game servers are shut down, meaning you can never play it again, everybody will be too focused on the new thing. But those who wanted to try that game from many years ago that's now closed, tough luck. How many of you remember Deadpool? Sorry, let me be specific. How many of you remember Deadpool, the video game? Now, admittedly, I've never finished it, but I do own it, so I could if I wanted to. However, my point is that you can no longer purchase this game. I've already talked about multiplayer games getting shut down. In the end, that's always a given someday. But for some reason, we live in a world where the hard work of developers, and even movie and TV studios based off of Warner Brothers' pathetic tax write-offs, can just be snapped out of existence like that. Deadpool was a game released in June 2013, but then a year later was removed from all digital storefronts. It was then remastered in November 2015. 2 years later, it was removed once again, and to this day, you can no longer purchase this game digitally. There are, of course, physical copies out there, but for an older and rarish game, they don't come cheap. Whether the game is great to play or not isn't the point. The point is that we live in a world where games can vanish in the blink of an eye. I know the reason for Deadpool was because of licensing issues, but the fact that this is the way distribution of media can work is baffling. I'm sure some of you know by now I am a big Alan Wake fan, and for a good year the game had been removed from digital storefronts due to music licensing issues. Yes, it's back and it's been remastered, but who knows, maybe one day in the future it will be removed from storefronts and never seen again. As time goes on, I'm actually kind of concerned we could be seeing this happen far too often on single player games. I even remember when the Grand Theft Auto Trilogy remaster came out, if you can call it a remaster, and Rockstar's intention was to remove the very original versions of those games off of Steam, meaning if you were to purchase the trilogy, you had to purchase the botched versions. And eventually, they did. You can no longer buy the original versions on Steam anymore. As we've already seen, practices that are deemed outlandish 10 years ago have become more common nowadays, and if we're not careful, the same will happen here. There needs to be a way in order to prevent games from being erased from existence, because not only is this a group of people's hard work, but it just means gamers down the line would have no way to play such a game if they so desired. Which actually brings us on to my final level of the iceberg. Being at the bottom of an iceberg is very dangerous. But you know what's also dangerous? Talking about and using footage of Nintendo games on YouTube, because it's highly likely I'll get demonetized. But I'm doing it anyway, baby! Okay, so if I'm being honest, what I'm describing here could actually apply to all video game publishers. But I mention Nintendo specifically because out of all the publishers in existence, the one fighting emulation the hardest are them. If somehow you have no idea what the word emulation means, it's a way to play games from previous consoles or computer systems on modern day hardware. More specifically, it's used to play games that are often no longer available, either because the game has been removed from sale or the console it ran on is discontinued. Hello, for legal reasons as well, you should already own the games you choose to emulate, and you definitely should not be downloading ROMs of games you don't. Now that we've got that out of the way, Nintendo just straight up doesn't want to re-release their older titles from their previous console generations. They have services like Nintendo Online where you can play some of their legacy titles, but there's so many games that people constantly request that they refuse to entertain. And to reiterate, it's not just Nintendo, many other publishers do this. Currently, on the PlayStation 5, the only original PlayStation 1 Resident Evil game you can play is the director's cut of the first Resident Evil. And yet, as of this video, if you have PSN credit tied to your account and own a PS3, you can simply log into it and purchase a wide array of PlayStation 1 titles somehow not available on the PlayStation 5, including the original Resident Evil 2 and 3. They've, for some reason, made it harder to find older titles on the PlayStation 3 store, but if you know of a game, if you search for it, you might find it there right now. So why on earth are these not accessible on modern platforms? Gamers are going to be curious about titles from decades ago, and when you purposely choose not to have those older titles easily accessible, of course they're going to look for alternative ways to play them, which is why emulation exists in the first place. The whole thing reeks of corporate greed, because why on earth would you release an older title that only a small number of people would probably be interested in at any one time? But the answer is, why not? Gamers should have that freedom, and with how much game companies make nowadays, is it really going to cost them that much money to ensure game preservation? But in the end, it's their own history they'd be losing out on the world remembering. History is what makes us learn from our mistakes, but if there's one thing I'm finding in this industry, is that we don't learn from those mistakes for long. There are some deeply troubling aspects of this industry that many people aren't talking about. Game preservation is just one of those things. Because again, who cares about a game if nobody's around right now to see it? Well, hello! Thank you so much for watching, especially if you've been providing your support over the past couple of months. It has been absolutely incredible to see all your responses. If you want to support the channel even further, I've opened up a Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Chronotoko. It's a bit bare bones in what it's offering right now, but hopefully over time I can add more and more features to it. If you haven't seen any of my previous videos, you can go over here. I think it's over here. I've never done one of these. It's over here. If you want to check those out, but otherwise, thank you so much again, and I'll see you in the next one.